All right, guys. It's been a minute since I've seen you. And so here we are. We're going to talk about Syria, Afghanistan, where the funding is, where the bills are and stuff with the federal government to I guess, what do we call it? Defund the Taliban for the 40 to 87 million we're sending them a week through various NGOs. And, talk about, I think the big thing we want to talk about today, on top of all that, are what can communities do? It's at the top level and there's only so much we can do. But one of the things that we can do is talk to communities and down at the local level and just get them thinking about this, having the conversations and coming up with some plans and stuff that they can do. But, you guys don't need any introduction. All of you have been on the show. Scott several times, Sarah several times, Legend. But just a quick intro. Legend, can't reveal your face because you're still doing the secret squirrel stuff. And you're back and forth in and out of CONUS, so we will reveal your identity. But Afghan American, former Army intelligence, Sarah, former CIA analyst, former CIA targeter, Scott, former Green Beret, and all of you guys have a very extensive intel type network, and they all seem to be pretty different networks. It's not like you guys are just all getting your information from the same sources. And so that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And I just want to say thank you for coming back. Even though the conversations are heavy, I just love seeing you guys. So thanks for making it back. But so let's kind of start with some of the intel stuff. Sarah, I know you have some info on this. Right now, media is blowing up. Christians are being massacred in Syria. And so give us some insight there. How is this happening? Why it's happening? Give us what you know about the situation going on in Syria.
Sure. I'm going to have to go back in time just a little bit. So if we go back to November 2021, that is the time basically the planning started for the Syrian blitzkrieg. How it all came together actually is one of our Benghazi plotters, the one I talk about all the time, Musa bin Ali, him and Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, the current president of Syria, were running a lot of terror line facilitation networks in Syria. They've been doing this for well over a decade. They run a really big terrorist camp in Libya, south of Misrata. And so they got together and basically decided, let's, pull in al-Qaeda and the Taliban, let's do in Syria what happened in Afghanistan, right? So it was November of 2021 when Abu Jawlani came to Afghanistan and he sat down with Musa, Sirajuddin Haqqani, who is the Minister of Interior of Afghanistan, and Mullah Yaqub, who is the Minister of Defense of Afghanistan, right? And they came up with this plot and planning to do the Syrian blitzkrieg. So as you can imagine, Jawlani didn't have enough fighters to take all of Syria by himself. So the plan they came up with is the Taliban said, okay, we'll give you training camps in Nangarhar province, right? You can come here and safely train, because at the time, Jawlani's camps were outside of Al-Tanf, a military base in Syria, and they were being bombed and they couldn't safely train there. So they moved a lot of their training to Afghanistan, but it wasn't enough. So Al-Qaeda, and specifically Hamza bin Laden, said, hey, we'll train a certain number of fighters for you. What do you need? And Jawlani said, I need 10,000 fighters. So for those couple years, al-Qaeda then trained an additional 10,000 fighters inside of Afghanistan on top of what Jawlani was sending, okay? So then they all go to Syria, and as we saw 3 years later, right, November 2024, the Syrian blitzkrieg happened and Jawlani took over. Now, when Jawlani took over, oddly, the press and the American diplomats, and we saw EU and the UN all leaned in, and they're like, oh, this is bringing democracy to Syria. Oh, he's going to have an inclusive government. Same language we heard in Afghanistan, where the intention is to make Syria just like Afghanistan, to make it an Islamic caliphate. So Giuliani plans to ethnically cleanse the Christians, the Alawites, the Kurds, etc., because that is the plan to bring in the Islamic Caliphate, just like the Taliban has been ethnically cleansing, obviously people from Panjshir, the Hazaras in Afghanistan. It's the exact same playbook, the exact same model, and a lot of the exact same people. So if we're not honest about the roots of how Giuliani took Syria, then we're not going to be able to understand what's going on. But when understand what's going on makes perfect sense.
How many Christians have been executed?
I don't really know the number of Christians, because they've also hit these Alawite neighborhoods.
What is that? What's an Alawite neighborhood?
It's just another minority in the country. We mostly know the Kurds because we fought with the Kurds, and they're going to move on, obviously, and do the Kurds. So the reporting come out of Syria, as you can imagine, is very limited, right? Because the government, like Afghanistan, is not run by terrorists, right? So we're maybe seeing 10% of the numbers. So we're hearing like in the thousands, but we just honestly don't know the number. And even all the years there was a Syrian civil war, it was so hard to get the numbers of people being killed. Like during the Syrian civil war, when Assad was basically killing his own people, he's also a bad guy, right? You don't want Assad in the country. You don't want Giuliani in the country. Over 500,000 Syrians died, right? Like we ignored all this, our press didn't put it out, and now they act like they're caring about something when these atrocities have been going on for a long time in Syria. Now it's just a terrorist doing them, right? A terrorist, though, that the U.S. government now has an official relationship with. They share intelligence with him. And the U.S. Department of Defense has, for the last month, been taking out Giuliani's rivals. So we've been consolidating power for this terrorist who's now ethnically cleansing in his country.
Wow. Just go over the caliphate again.
Sure.
So a lot of the listeners don't understand what that is. So can you just give us a definition of that?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I bet Legend could do a much better job of explaining like the history. But over time, there's basically 5 Islamic caliphates. The last one, I believe, ended in like the 1940s, right, when the Ottoman Empire fell. So the terrorists want to recreate and reinvent the caliphate. The person actually leading this is Hamza bin Laden, because his father said, I don't care if it takes 100 years, right? We're going to reestablish the caliphate. Well, Hamza's like, I'm going to do it in my lifetime to honor my father. So he's been, as you can imagine, connecting with a lot of the groups, Sunni, Shia, it doesn't matter, and saying, we got to do this as a team and we have to work together. So basically the first country in the caliphate is Iran, even though that came in a long time ago. So they view that as already in the caliphate. So now in this present generation, Afghanistan's 1, Syria's 2, and then their next move looks like, I thought it was going to be Mali, but now it looks like Somalia first. So they're going to try to either get Mali or Somalia next to be the next country that falls to the terrorists and becomes a piece of this caliphate. And then over time, they want to do Iraq, Burkina Faso, Libya, right? So they have a plan over time to keep doing what they think they did in Afghanistan and what they definitely did in Syria.
Wow. So basically if I'm hearing this right, they are going through, back to just Syria, they're going through demographic group by group by group. So they haven't reached the Kurds yet.
Correct. Well, the interesting part is they tried to so the sad part is when Giuliani took over, he did kind of one of those, you got to turn your weapons in, you got to register. Sadly, a lot of the Christians and Alawites turned the weapons in, right? The West was pushing this. The Kurds are like, we're not giving up our weapons. A lot of people, even think tanks in the U.S. government, is like, Kurds, turn in your weapons, be a part of this new democracy, this new inclusive government. So the Kurds luckily didn't. The Kurds are still being attacked, by the Turkish government. So it's not like there's nothing going on there. But of course, it's going to end up being some sort of larger war because the Kurds are not going to obviously give their weapons over to terrorists.
What do you think about, from my understanding, we're leaving Syria, correct? So I got a really good friend. He's a Green Beret, just served over there. Sounds like it's going to be one of the last deployments over there. And the Kurds are really, they're obviously very worried about what happens to them when we pull out. Should we be, what's your opinion? Should we be pulling out of there or should we stay there?
Well, I at least know when they planned the Syrian blitzkrieg, there's basically two key parts of it, right? So they planned it because the U.S. is about to pull out. It was even going to try to push them out faster, right? But also a part of the planning, so there are these camps in Syria, right? It's mostly known where the ISIS women and children are, but there's some fighters in them too. I think, gosh, there's like over 40,000 ISIS members in these camps. Some are children though, you know what I mean? And so that's one of the big pieces of this push. So when the U.S. leaves, we're going to hand those camps over to Giuliani and his exclusive government. And he's already made a promise. This was part of the whole deal that they're going to release the women and children in those camps. So the real deal here is when we leave, basically, it helps to reestablish ISIS, the next generation of ISIS. And even al-Qaeda and the Taliban have offered to take 10,000 of those women and children, bring them to Afghanistan, give them sustenance, make sure the women can get remarried into jihadi families, and build that next generation of terrorists too. So this is going to be a huge win for ISIS when we leave Syria. But I do think we're going to leave Syria. I mean, it's not my choice if we leave or stay, but I'm just saying basically the tumbling effect of that's going to be a major resurgence of ISIS.
Need some good discounted dining options, reliable roadside assistance, preferred credit card offers, or fraud protection? You need to check out AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. No matter what your age is, you can take advantage of their services for either yourself or your family. And you can have confidence that their partners stand behind the vision our nation's founders had to enrich all of our lives through goods and services offered by like-minded companies. But joining AMAC isn't just about the benefits. It's about belonging to a community that stands for timeless American values. Regardless of your age, you can enroll for a 5-year AMAC membership for 47% off. Visit amac.us/SRS today to take advantage of this special offer. AMAC's membership is made up of Americans who believe in faith, family, and freedom. We are over 2 million members strong, and we're growing. Their mission is simple: protect the interest of all freedom-loving Americans and offer incredible member benefits, from exclusive discounts on travel, insurance, and everyday services to supporting strong representation in Washington, D.C. AMAC is here to make a difference in your life and in our nation. Visit amac.us/SRS today to join me and millions of Americans who believe in backing their mission. That's amac.us/SRS. Join AMAC and become part of a movement that stands for you, your family, and your future. As you've heard on my show before, there are bad guys out there who want to try to take us down. It's all they think about. And if you ask me, this could happen at any time. Will it be terrorists? Hackers? We don't know. I just think there's a possibility that something's coming. That's why I'm asking you to get prepared, and I'm making it easy. Go right now to preparewithshawn.com and you'll see a 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply for $100 off. Their 3-month kit provides 2,000 calories a day, the amount most people need in an emergency, down to the calorie. They've studied survival and know what they're doing. If you're like me and want to help take control of your family's safety, this could be your chance. Go to preparewithshawn.com and get $100 off a 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. Preparewithshawn.com. We spent 20 years at war. This is for everybody. We spent 20 years at war. The terrorism just seems to be this snowball effect that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Then U.S. goes to war, it shrinks. As soon as we leave, I mean, it seems like it's growing. It seems like every time we leave, it gets bigger, faster. And so do you have something?
Yeah, well, I want to point out, so we fight terrorists, but we have no end games for them, okay? So basically all the terrorists I know that we captured in Pakistan got freed, right? Because they didn't go through the Pakistani judicial system. We didn't extradite them to the United States beside a couple of really high level, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, right? So after like 5 years, the Pakistani prisons are getting full, and they're like, What do you want to do with them, U.S.? Okay, release them. The detainees we picked up in Iraq, re-release them. These ones in Syria are going to get released. The Gitmo detainees, we released 80% of them plus. So we have no end game for these terrorists. So then we put them back out on the street and then they build the next generation. So we're not actually defeating them. We're just holding them 5 to 7 years and then restarting the entire process again. There is no end game for terrorists.
Is this on purpose? Is this because U.S. wants to be at war because it's a big money-making machine? Why don't we end it?
The problem is, in my opinion, the U.S. plans in 2 to 4 year cycles, how they're funded. Nobody is in it for the long term. One is because of how we elect politicians, but the funding cycles in the Department of Defense, right? It's like, let's get this money this time. Here's our mission. We don't have long-term strategic plans. You know, I mean, everyone talks about it, but it is the greatest example, right? The end of Charlie Wilson's war, when he says, hey, we put all this money into these weapons, right? Let's put money into education. And no one wanted to think of it long term. And then, you know, we got, unfortunately, the problems we had with 9/11. So we are horrible at the long term planning. There is no long term end game for terrorists. They know it. They all know they're going to get released. They all know they're going to get back in the battlefield. And so if you have no repercussions, it gives you a confidence.
Interesting. Do you guys have anything to add on that?
I mean, I would love to hear Legend's take on, you know, the long game that these individuals play with the caliphate. And I think it starts with that. You know, we have a, this is me looking back on 20 years of war. I think we have a very Western way of thinking about things and a preferred way of war. You know, look at how we took counterinsurgency and we literally lifted it over from Vietnam and applied it into Afghanistan, into that rural insurgency. So we applied a counterinsurgency model and fought it for 20 years and, you know, mixed in with a CT strategy where we were essentially mowing the grass, you know, cutting the heads off, but then new ones grew. But I do think that we really have to look carefully at how do these individuals think about their end game. They're fighting if necessary, a multi-century narrative. You know, they're prepared to stay with this thing, you know, to the end. And you know, they love, it's often said they love death as much as we love life in order to achieve that. So I just don't think we're even in the same arena in terms of mindset. And we don't fully appreciate the level of persistence that they have to meet their strategic goals, and that they have no intention, they being the, you know, small percentage of Islamist radicals who are hijacking this religion, they have no intention of coexisting with the West.
See, you know, everybody seems to be, all of our adversaries seem to be such long-term thinkers. China has a 200-year plan. Terrorists have a long game plan. I mean, what do you guys think about what we're seeing in Europe through their immigration policies? I mean, you go over there now, you go to Paris, you know, the kind of the tourism district seems fine. You leave and it's these Islamist extremist neighborhoods. And same thing's going on in London, same thing's going on in Belgium. When me and you were at the inauguration, we spoke with the oncoming ambassador to Belgium. He was talking to us about this. I'm hoping to interview him. Germany, it's happening there. And, you know, I saw my friend Joe Lonsdale put out a tweet not too long ago, and he was kind of, how do I say this? He was just broaching the idea, hey, what happens when Europe gets completely flipped from Christian nations who are run by Christians to Islamist extremists? And what does that look like, not just for Europe, but for the entire world? I mean, there goes our allies, you know? And so, I mean, what do you think about that, Legend?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.
It's an honor to be here on your show again with Lieutenant Colonel Mann and Miss Adams. I brought you a gift. It's a pakol from Afghanistan.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, since we're on gifts, I have gifts for you guys too. It's probably the only reason you keep coming back.
Well, now that
There
I
you
saw
go.
that Palmer ate him during the episode, I'm like, good. I'm just going to start eating him now. I'm not even going to bring him home.
We can eat them during the episode?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This could be like a pre-brief.
Do these come in ranch flavor?
They will work on that.
Yeah.
I know you
Very
love
American.
ranch.
We should
we'll
do
work
that.
on that.
I'm still addicted to ranch.
And one other gift, Legend. You familiar with the unplugged phone?
I am, yes.
Perfect. I gave Sarah one. I've given Scott one. And so that was developed by Eric Prince. I met with their team, lots of veterans, tech people, entrepreneurs. And basically what that is, it's a way to get around big tech spying on us, basically, stealing our data. And they've put a lot of it's just a great phone. There's a lot of developments that they put into that phone. There's a kill switch, so nobody can listen to you. It actually separates the battery from the actual device, so nobody can listen in. Instagram, X, Google, none of those can suck your advertising data out of that phone. And so it's just everybody's worried about big tech censorship, and so I thought you should have one too.
It's a great gift. Thank you. And I thank Eric Prince as well. I recently met him somewhere in the East Coast. He's a very smart man.
Great guy.
Yes,
Great guy.
Great guy, gentleman, and very smart man. But thank you very much.
My
And that
pleasure.
Eric Prince line is going to probably start a lot of rumors.
Good point. But what do you think about what I just said about Europe?
I would like to, if you let me, go back to what your first question about Syria. I don't follow Syria a lot. I'm mostly focused on Afghanistan, but it's all connected, you know. And so what I've been hearing is that there are Taliban fighters in Syria. There are Taliban members that supported al-Jolani during his takeover of Syria just a few months ago, and that there are Taliban fighters in Syria right now, currently at the moment. So that is one. Two, the second thing I've heard is that they're killing a lot of religious minorities and many, many Christians. They're being slaughtered on a daily basis. Al-Jolani, I'm not too familiar with him, but I've read some. And based on the intelligence that I've seen from that part of the world, al-Jolani is a terrorist. He was a terrorist. He was a jihadi, and he's still a jihadi. The only thing is he has dropped his turban and worn a suit and a necktie. But he is still a terrorist. And so what is really disturbing is the fact that the U.S. State Department dropped $10 million bounty on his head. And all of a sudden, the Justice Rewards Program, State Department website, completely just, the page that showed the bounty on him completely disappeared in a matter of minutes. So he was a terrorist on Monday evening. He was no longer a terrorist. Now he's a state official and he's traveling everywhere. And under his command, his army is actually slaughtering Christians. They're slaughtering Muslims and other religious minorities in Syria.
So they aren't just targeting Christians.
No, they are killing lots of Christians right now. And this is unfortunately something, unless the U.S. President Trump takes action, this is something that will continue very rapidly. Remember, al-Jolani was a member of ISIS. You saw what ISIS did to Christians, the Christian minority community in Iraq.
What did they do?
They slaughtered them. They beheaded them. They executed them, dumped their bodies in the river. They're doing the same thing in Syria right now. And don't forget-
Levels of horror that were just unimaginable.
All the videos we saw, burning them alive, put them in cages, drowning them, putting kids in cages, dropping them in the river, that kind of
And
stuff.
they take the women as slaves, as sex slaves. So this is something that President Trump this is unfortunately the Jolani's reward. His status as terrorist was removed by Mr. Joe Biden, the last administration that's one of the final things they did. And so now we have a new administration. I wish President Trump reimposes those, lists him as a terrorist, which he is. And so once a jihadi, you're always a jihadi. You don't change overnight. That man is killing Christians. He is killing other religious minorities. And my fear is that this is going to worsen. It's going to increase, especially now that he has Taliban members with them. and he's getting support from the leadership of the Taliban.
What about Europe?
What about Europe? The immigration?
The immigration.
Look, Shawn.
What happens if it switches?
Brother, let me tell you this. I was telling this earlier. If we look at this as, hey, all Muslims are terrorists, you have 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. If they were terrorists, you would see it. You would see the problem. That's not the case. These individuals, and I'm not saying at the same time that there is not a terrorism problem in Islam. There is. And it's unfortunately true, and it's happening in Muslim countries are not taking the lead, taking action against it. Why is it that America should be the one to go and fix all of this stuff? Why isn't Saudi Arabia taking action? Or Qatar or UAE? I'll go back to the European stuff. The immigration. Europe has a open border policy. They allow everyone and anyone in. They don't vet. And then all of a sudden you see stabbings. I recently saw that unfortunately, an Afghan immigrant stabbed, I think, a 4-year-old child and his parent. And then when the cops arrested him, he was just laughing. You will see that laughter in America, here, in our own communities, unless that border is closed, the southern border, and unless you start vetting, unless you start paying attention to who you are allowing into this country. Europe opened its borders, all of these migrants came in, and now they're dealing with it.
I mean, the other fear, too, is not just street crime. I mean, when I'm talking about our allies, and we're talking about a no immigration policy, I mean, these are nuclear powers as well. And, you know, we bat back and forth with Iran. Well, what happens when when the UK government gets overturned and it is all Islamic extremists?
Go ahead, sir.
Well, I think one of the things, too, we focus on like the immigration coming into a country, which we could flip something politically, but it's not the immigration. It's first off corruption in countries. There's a lot of corruption in Europe. And what happens with that corruption is people take advantage of it. Obviously, the one group that's taken the most advantage of it is the Muslim Brotherhood, right? I mean, that's why Switzerland is the #1 country in Europe with terrorists in it, especially high-level terrorists, is because of the Muslim Brotherhood influence. Also, Qatar has a lot of influence and money in Europe, and they're a big piece of this. Turkey obviously can't seem to choose sides, and they do a lot of enabling for different terrorist groups, especially ISIS, right? And allow all these terrorists to flow through their borders. They provide them passports, etc. So if you don't deal with the Muslim Brotherhood, ban them, the influence of Qatar, and then you allow Turkey to stay in NATO with their actions, and you know they have a big play in Syria, then that's the problem, right? It's they're the ones causing the influence, putting the money into politics and making those shifts. So I think we need to be honest about them, because that happens here too. Qatar has a huge influence in our universities, and we saw that kind of play out, right, with so much support of Hamas. The Muslim Brotherhood, we can't even get the Muslim Brotherhood is banned in multiple countries, right? Like Saudi Arabia, like the Emirates. We can't ban them in the United States because they give so much money to both political parties, right? That's scary. So we need to deal with kind of the heads of the snake here.
Interesting.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
Look, 9/11 hijackers, right? Those 19 attackers and their supporters entered the U.S. legally. The State Department gave them visas. Nasser Ahmad Tawhidi in Oklahoma, who wanted to kill Americans on Election Day last year, and he was apprehended. He was evacuated from Afghanistan by who? By the agency, by the U.S. government. The open borders. The U.S. government keeps the southern border open, or for whatever reason, they kept that border open for 4 years. And we know for a fact that jihadists who want to kill Americans in the name of Islam entered the United States. These criminal organizations, these terrorists, they have hijacked Islam and Islamic symbols. They're not Muslim. They want to kill Americans in the name of Islam. And the U.S. government allows it. They allow these people to enter the country. And in the case of 9/11, like I said, they even gave them visas. Now, look, I am an American Muslim. I've been warning the U.S. government The resistance that is fighting the terrorists on the ground for the past 4 years, they have been warning that these terrorists will attack you again. They're in your communities. The U.S. government ignores me. The U.S. government ignores Colonel Mann, Sarah Adams, the resistance, everyone. And then sadly, God forbid, the next terrorist attack will occur, as it did on 9/11. Then what happens? It's the same politicians in D.C. that ignore us now that will turn around and say all Muslims are terrorists. This is something we need to take care of right away.
I don't understand. I mean, there's a lot I don't understand, but why? What is this just? That's why I'm asking, do they want us to get attacked so that we can go and do another war?
I just don't see that level of coherence at our federal government level. And this is not administration specific. I just based on, for example, Shawn, what happened with the withdrawal in Afghanistan, that was, I think the National Security Council put out its evacuation memo on 14 August. Yep. Right. And, I have it on good authority that thing was one hell of an afterthought. Like they were scrambling to get that. And this was like who was to prioritize for evacuation. Kabul fell on the 15th. This thing came out on the 14th. So there's nothing, at least that I've seen, that tells me that there's like a coherent approach to this of keeping it going. I think from my perspective, it's more of just an inability to really, it's hubris. I mean, it's arrogance at an institutional level to think that we really comprehend and appreciate just the persistence, will, and capacity of this threat. I mean, even if you just look at like where we are today is so reminiscent of pre-9/11. I went in, I think I was telling you guys yesterday when we did the briefing, I went into and I'll just say it, a Carolina Duke game at Chapel Hill this past weekend, to see a storied basketball rivalry, right? 21,000 seat capacity in the Dean Smith Center, not one metal detector in main primary entry points. The only search that happened was if you had a bag, like if you declared a bag. So there were no metal detectors of a 21,000 seat venue. And I mean, anyone I would hope watching or hearing this, like sits up at that because that's new. And I gotta believe that's not isolated to Chapel Hill. And that is what I worry about more than anything else, is that humans are just, ridiculously short memory, and we tend to forget and dismiss. And then we tell ourselves narratives that this isn't going to happen. You tell ourselves that the ocean's going to protect us and we just need to focus on things here at home. But the reality is this one has followed us home.
Let's move into, we'll get to what we're seeing and what we can do, at the local community here at the end. But let's move back into what we're here to talk about today. So if you guys have any intel updates since the last time we spoke, I mean, Scott, me and you talk on a pretty regular basis, but it's been about a month, I think, since we've spoken. Sarah, it's been a couple months since you've been here at Legend. It's been several months. And so what are the updates that you're seeing out from Afghanistan and these terrorist networks?
Well, I can go first. The resistance is still fighting. The Taliban, al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISKP, and the rest of the terrorist organizations that are there. The intelligence networks that America helped build in Afghanistan, they're still operational. I'm not talking about the GDI, the Taliban. I'm talking about the ones that are under the control of the resistance.
When you bring up acronyms like the GDI, you have to understand the audience doesn't understand what that is. So the GDI is the Taliban's intelligence service, correct?
Correct. General Directorate of Intelligence. The head of GDI is Abdulhaq Wasiq, a man who was a prisoner at Guantanamo Bay, and America released him, and now he's leading Taliban's intelligence. And so there is other intelligence networks operational in Afghanistan. The most active ones are led by President Saleh, Amrullah Saleh. He runs an organization called Afghanistan Green Trend. And there are many other intelligence networks, but by far the most reliable intelligence that I've seen comes from AGT, which is Afghanistan Green Trend. What I've heard and what I've seen, the documents that I've seen shows that pertaining to America, that there are over 1,000 Taliban and ISKP operatives in the United States. And this 1,000 are not the individuals that were emboldened after the United States abandoned Afghanistan and withdrew. These are not the individuals in the Afghan American community, in the diaspora, or those we brought in, 120,000 that were evacuated. They're not members of those communities who are now sympathetic towards the Taliban. The 1,000 or so that I mentioned, these are deep cover operatives that report to Sirajuddin Haqqani and then the leadership of the Taliban and ISKP.
And where's this intel coming from?
The anti-Taliban resistance.
Who's running that?
There are several resistance fronts. You've met Commander Ahmad Massoud, the leader of the National Resistance Front. There's also President Amrullah Saleh, who's leading Afghanistan Green Trend.
And can you talk about him? That's where I was going with this.
President Saleh?
Yes.
Of course, yes. Well, the man needs no introduction, but I'll do my best. He has been fighting in the resistance one way or another since I think he was 15 or 16 from what I've seen. He did intelligence liaison work under the leadership of Commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, who led the resistance against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and then against the Taliban and al-Qaeda. President Mr. Saleh at that point did liaison work. For him, he led intelligence. And then after the United States went into Afghanistan in 2001, he became the head of Afghanistan's intelligence, the National Directorate of Security.
So that's the Afghan version of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Correct. America helped build it in Afghanistan. The head of that intelligence unit, NDS, was Mr. Saleh. He literally built that NDS in Afghanistan. I don't think there's any American intelligence official that is unfamiliar with Mr. Saleh. He was, and I believe he still is, our ally. And so after that, he became the Minister of Interior in Afghanistan. And then after that, he started AGT in 2011, which is Afghanistan Green Trend, which is one of the main political parties in Afghanistan, grassroots movement, had millions of members inside Afghanistan. In, I believe it was 2019, Mr. Saleh won the elections and became the first vice president of Afghanistan under the Ghani administration. Ashraf Ghani was the president. Mr. Saleh was his vice president. And so on August 15, 2021, when Mr. Ghani, the former president, fled Afghanistan to Dubai and abandoned everything, Mr. Saleh, Vice President Saleh, did not flee Afghanistan. He instead went to Panjshir Valley, which was the only province that had not fallen to the Taliban. And he declared a national resistance against the Taliban. And because Mr. Ghani had fled, according to Article 60 and 67 of the Constitution of Afghanistan, Mr. Saleh became the acting president of Afghanistan. Mr. Saleh, President Saleh now, his time in office ended in July of 2024, just a few months ago. And so he being a spy, I think spies never quit. And so he went back to just like Sarah Adams doesn't quit. Spies don't quit. He went back to leading intelligence in Afghanistan, and his network is operational in Afghanistan. And I don't think anyone has as much sources under his control as Mr. Saleh in that region.
So that's where a lot of this info is coming from.
Correct. He runs, he's correct. Yes. Yes.
And I think it's important to note here too, because a lot of folks, to your question, they're watching this and they're like, okay, well, these are, veterans getting this. Like, why aren't we getting this from the intelligence community, or why aren't we getting this from the formal institutions? And one thing I'll just give as an example, Legend won't talk about it, but, Mr. Saleh was abandoned, just like a whole bunch of other Afghan assets were abandoned, on August 15th. We're talking 98 to 99% of the human intelligence assets in Afghanistan that took 20 years to build were left behind. And this is coming from the former CENTCOM commander, right? What happened was a lot of veterans like Legend, who had pre-existing relationships, found ways to do humanitarian outreach in those moments to fill the gap because no one else was picking up the phone. And also had the foresight as an intelligence guy to say, well, it's probably not a good idea to leave Mr. Saleh out there on his own. And so over these last several years, Legend has cultivated a relationship, and really done the job. And I just don't know any other way to say it, right? Done the job, of what a formal intelligence agency would normally do with a massive asset like that. So now you've got literally the guy who is regarded as the father of Afghanistan intelligence talking primarily to an Afghan-American Army, U.S. Army NCO. And that's where that primary relationship took place. Now, multiply that, Shawn, at scale. You have Sarah Adams doing her version of that, me doing my version of that with Afghan Special Forces and commandos. And that's what's evolved over the last 4 years, is by the virtue of abandoning 98 to 99% of our intelligence capability and our commandos and our special ops. The veteran community stepped into the breach and took over those relationships for primarily humanitarian reasons. But here we are 4 years later, and what you have is high veracity intelligence and reporting coming through these channels instead of formal channels.
You sign up for something, forget about it after the trial ends, then you're charged month after month after month. The subscriptions are there, but you're not using them. 85% of people have at least one paid subscription going unused every month. Thanks to Rocket Money, I can see all my subscriptions in one place and cancel the ones I'm not using anymore. And now I'm saving more money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money's dashboard gives you a clear view of your expenses across all of your accounts and keeps you informed with alerts if bills increase in price, there's unusual spending activity, or if you're close to going over budget. Rocket Money will even automatically scan your bills to find opportunities to save and lower your bills. Then you can ask them to negotiate for you. They'll deal with customer service so you don't have to. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/SRS today. That's rocketmoney.com/SRS. rocketmoney.com/SRS. I know everybody out there has to be just as frustrated as I am when it comes to the BS and the rhetoric that the mainstream media continuously tries to force feed us. And I also know how frustrating it can be to try to find some type of a reliable news source. It's getting really hard to find the truth and what's going on in the country and in the world. And so one thing we've done here at Shawn Ryan Show is we are developing our newsletter. And the first contributor to the newsletter that we have is a woman, former CIA targeter. Some of you may know her as Sarah Adams, call sign Superbad. She's made 2 different appearances here on the Shawn Ryan Show. And some of the stuff that she has uncovered and broke on this show is just absolutely mind-blowing. And so I've asked her if she would contribute to the newsletter and give us a weekly intelligence brief. So it's going to be all things terrorists, how terrorists are coming up through the southern border, how they're entering the country, how they're traveling, what these different terrorist organizations throughout the world are up to. And here's the best part, the newsletter is actually free. We're not going to spam you. It's about 1 newsletter a week, maybe 2 if we release 2 shows. The only other thing that's going to be in there besides the intel brief is if we have a new product or something like that. But like I said, it's a free CIA intelligence brief. Sign up. Links in the description or in the comments. We'll see you in the newsletter. I'll admit it, before Shopify, running my business was tough. Figuring out how to market and sell products, fulfill orders, keep track of shipping and transaction records, not to mention creating a website. Shopify made all of that super easy. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not so secret, Shop Pay can boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through. If you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month for a 3-month trial period at shopify.com/SRS. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/SRS to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/SRS. You say we've lost 98 to 99% of all intelligence coming from Afghanistan.
Human intelligence.
Human intelligence. So why would we just... Why isn't U.S. intelligence agencies, why aren't they keeping in communication with them if this is such a big threat?
They have communication. They are bringing intelligence, but it's from the Taliban. So we lost 98 to 99% of our collection, our assets we developed over 20 years. We're now bringing in reporting, but it's from the Taliban. The Taliban is now the source of the U.S. government and the source of counterterrorism information in Afghanistan.
So we're now in cahoots with the GDI.
Yes, so that's who we get intelligence from, and from Sirajuddin Haqqani.
And there was a political calculus to when we left Afghanistan in 2021, and you saw it happen, where the former administration made a conscious decision to not engage members of the resistance. And Legend can speak very specifically to that, but there were overt actions by the State Department and others to essentially block or impede or just not conduct any kind of outreach with resistance forces, And so a lot of these high veracity assets that you would normally, that we cultivated for 20 years, they were talking to veterans. They were talking to intelligence alumni, and there was no formal relationship. So, guys like Legend maintained and cultivated this relationship over 4 years, knowing that at some point, maybe adults come back in the room. We're gonna want those relations. We're gonna need those relationships. We're gonna need those members of the resistance, right? And so I think that's where we are today. We're at like this strategic crossroads where we are looking at a new administration. Our veteran population from the global war on terror, in my assessment, has done an amazing job of recognizing an institutional shortfall, and they have kept it going somehow, cashing in their pension funds and their kids' college accounts to keep these individuals alive, but they've done it. But, how much more and how much longer are we going to ask that of these veterans to do that?
Shawn, it's not even only the intelligence that the U.S. intelligence that deals with the Taliban. It's even the State Department. Like, take, for example, Miss Karen Decker, Ambassador Karen Decker, U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan. She was appointed by the previous administration, by Mr. Joe Biden. She's still the U.S. Ambassador under the Trump administration. Ambassador Karen Decker is literally acting as the unofficial First Lady of the Taliban. She's in direct communication with every Taliban governor all over Afghanistan. She has denounced an armed resistance against the Taliban, against ISKP and al-Qaeda. She has not met with leadership of the resistance. She does not even speak with the resistance. She has denounced the resistance. So diplomatically, we're dealing with the Taliban as well. Not we. These folks, these certain individuals within the U.S. government are very I don't know how to say it. They do not want to deal with the resistance. They only want to deal with the Taliban. Whenever the resistance, the anti-Taliban resistance hosts events, political, diplomatic events, conferences in order to unite the Afghan communities in this war against the Taliban, whenever they meet up in Vienna or Dushanbe or anywhere else, the State Department, under the leadership of Ambassador Karen Decker, dispatches individuals and says to the host countries to not allow it to happen.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, even our State Department basically went to the government of Tajikistan, right, the leadership and the heads, the intelligence leadership, and said, don't have relationships with the resistance, or it's going to affect your relationship with the U.S. government. Like, that's at the level it's at. And, you know, we need to be honest. We have Taliban sympathizers in our government, right? We have them in the State Department. You know, we likely have them in the NSC. We definitely have them in the CIA, right? This is a problem unless we root them out. It's just like when you had communists in the government, which we still do, right? When you have these influences in the government, they're the ones making these deals. They're the ones making sure the money keeps going to the Taliban and to the terrorists. And so you're up against those types as well. And it is a lot of money involved in this. There's corruption involved in supporting terrorism as well.
Do you think Taliban are professionals and technocrats?
Do I think they're what?
Professionals and technocrats?
They are now.
Well, Ambassador Thomas West believes Taliban are professionals and sincere and technocrats.
And the crazy part of Thomas West, they've moved him to another role in the State Department, but what he's in charge of is sanctions, right? So we got now a Taliban sympathizer in charge of sanctions. So how often do you think he's sanctioning the Taliban?
So what you're really, if you step back and just look at it, Shawn, you think about this, you have a point of view that is an institutional point of view that started to form, I don't know, certainly when Afghanistan collapsed in 2021, this emerging point of view in our government from the previous administration that the Taliban are actually someone we could deal with, someone we could normalize relations with, someone who really offers a better solution, not just in Afghanistan, but, global stability, right? That, and then you see that because you start to see humanitarian aid money going there, CT dollars going there, all the stuff that you all have talked about. But that's a reflection of an institutional way of thinking, right? Like, this is who we're going to deal with now. And then you also saw just the omission of any engagement with any of the commandos and special forces and others that we had trained for 20 years who then went to resist completely on their own, not even tacit political support. So I say all that because that is such a divergent point of view from the veteran population who fought this war for 20 years and who has been on the phone nonstop. So, you're talking about individuals who dealt with this threat up close and personal, who understood it, who most of us said never again after 9/11. And we gave away our youth and our life to, not life, but our, just everything about our life to fight this.
A lot of people did.
A lot of people did. But the larger point here is that the people that have been on the phone working this side of it, that have that divergent point of view, they're the ones that fought this war. They're the ones that know this enemy better than anybody, and they know what's at stake and they know what's coming. That's the part that just baffles me. Is it would be one thing if this were all, just a bunch of volunteers who jumped into the fray because they're looking for something to do. But these are people who honestly really want to put this behind them. They've moved on with their lives. I know I feel that way, but they're doing this out of a duty to warn, because we've dealt with this enemy for a lot of years. We know what they're capable of. We know they followed us home, and we feel a duty to warn. But it is a divergent point of view, unfortunately, that we have about what the Taliban are about, al-Qaeda, than the current institutional point of view. And we're hoping that we can bring those together and figure this out, kind of a private public gathering of comparing notes over the last 4 years and start to sort this out.
Sir, do you have any updates?
Well, Legend kind of brought up a bit, right? He talked a little bit about Sirajuddin Haqqani and ISKP. I think what a lot of people don't understand is how al-Qaeda fits into that and why it matters, right? So al-Qaeda is planning an attack on the U.S. homeland, but who are they using, right, to be involved in that attack? Sirajuddin Haqqani, right? He's the Minister of Interior in Afghanistan. He allows basically the terrorists to come into Afghanistan. His now kind of like cousin runs the refugee services, right? So his name is Hafiz Akhani. He was involved in Abbey Gate. He's also involved in the U.S. Homeland plot. He's the one that basically takes our humanitarian dollars and gives it to the foreign jihadists saying, oh, they're refugees coming back into the country, et cetera, right? So there's a whole pipeline of our money going into these foreign fighters enabled by the Haqqanis, okay? Then we have the whole ISKP problem, right? So our counterterrorism dollars goes to the Taliban to fight ISKP. It's a huge farce. Last month, we did 9 days on Twitter just showing operations the Taliban said they did against ISKP and they weren't, right? There is a joint training camp. You know where we dropped the big mother of all bombs? There is a joint training camp there. It's named after Siraj Shadeen's father, the Jalaluddin Haqqani Training Center. It has al-Qaeda terrorists there, ISKP terrorists there, and Haqqani network terrorists there, right? So when we talk about al-Qaeda's Homeland plot, they're using the Haqqanis to leverage in the plot. They're using ISIS to leverage in the plot. And then, of course, al-Qaeda's leading the plot. Like, think of how dangerous this is when he says there's 1,000 just under the bucket of ISKP and the Haqqanis, right? Then we talk about all the groups al-Qaeda is aligned with. How many of those are in the country? Because al-Qaeda is saying that's another 1,000, right? So these numbers start to get really big when you bring all these groups under one umbrella to fight a common enemy. Us, right? We impacted them. We impacted them in Afghanistan. We impacted them in Iraq, and we impacted them in Syria, which is kind of the most recent open wound, right? And so they want our war fighters who did that in those countries to feel it here. They want you to feel it in your neighborhood, at your home. They don't want you to feel safe where you live now. And that's something we really need to understand and listen to, right? Because I do think, as Scott said, Israel had a little hubris, right? There were reports going in. Israel got information. I saw some of the stuff passed to Israel about the Hamas guys training in Afghanistan. And, you know, they did have some belief something's going to happen. They never thought it was going to be the scale it was. Now, the U.S. government's getting the same type of information. Israel's getting probably a lot more. And they're now like, oh, that's not going to happen here at that level, right? We're not going to see that happen here. And that's very, very dangerous, especially when we're talking about just the numbers that came in illegally. But remember, our State Department has been issuing passports and visas to Haqqani network guys. Plenty of former CIA officers have provided tips to the government over the last 4 years. They haven't picked them up. They live in our communities. They know Haqqanis are here, right? So that's not just the terrorists who came here under fake IDs and are undercover, right? So to understand just how many are in our country is really scary. And yes, we're starting to close the border, but we now need to go back and re-vet everybody we went in the last 4 years. And I've heard no discussions about that happening yet, but like that needs to happen. And
Revet who we gave passports and visas to?
Yeah.
Or revet everybody that crossed the border?
And crossed the border, especially.
I think we're kind of doing that. Isn't Tom Homeland doing that right now? It was 14
million people. So we're not doing it. And what I was saying to an intel agency just a week ago, I said, we need to be running against this threat. Like, this needs to be fast forward. The toughest thing we ever did. We need to basically take almost like it's a crisis, right? And, you know, you take a bunch of people and you throw them at the hurricane to help, right? We need to pull in, I don't care if it's retired people, we need to put 10,000 people re-vetting all these. I'm serious. Like, we're at that point. We let too many people in this country that we don't even know who's here. Like, we're not picking up and deporting fast enough. And Trump says that himself. Like, he understands, right? The magnitude of when you're talking 14 million. But I don't think people are understanding there's a chunk in that are the terrorists, and we have to go just as fast at the terrorists as we're doing against Venezuelan gangs. Like, this is super important.
I mean, it seems like Homeland, Border Patrol, ICE all seem to be very busy to me. So you don't think they're moving fast enough. I mean, how would they move faster? It's only been what?
Well, they're moving fast enough, right, on like Venezuelan gangs, but who's doing the vetting to identify the terrorists, right? That's not Tom Homan's job, right? He needs that from the intelligence community. Like, you know, that FBI needs to be stepping up and doing that. DHS needs to be playing a role, right? Like, we need to see, honestly, probably some sort of task force come together to do that.
You know, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
I got a question. Let's say the secretary, right, of ICE, Homeland Security, they arrest this, they locate this one individual. Say he's Afghan. Mm-hmm. And they suspect he's a terrorist. Who do they corroborate that information with? They call the Taliban and say, hey, do you know Mr. Abdullah that is here? And if that person is one of those deep cover Taliban operatives or ISKP operatives, do you think the Taliban will admit to it?
No, they'll say we have no record on him.
Yeah, I think the thing that has to be walked back to, and this is the part that really is contentious, and I think we gotta do something, is that there is such a difference between what the government says the terror problem looks like and what, frankly, members of the global war on terror community say it looks like after having been on the phone for 4 years with these individuals. But what I will tell you is, like, for example, in my only thing that I would just add to what they've said on the intel front is, you know, I have the opportunity to run the seams with these different, you know, on Signal and these different groups and just listen, you know, and that's what I try to do. I try to just listen. I'm not an intel analyst. I'm not a targeter, but I am pretty good at relationships and just listening. And what I am hearing consistently across multiple groups is 1,000. Mm-hmm. I'm hearing the number 1,000 a lot. And it's coming up in different, I mean, radically different, verticals. There's no way, you know, and so that really concerns me a lot, that number, is popping up, you know, all of the time, you know, conversationally. And then the other thing that really bothers me is that no one is engaging any elements at all of the resistance just on the intel side. I mean, when they've made clear and overt offerings to help with that and to give a competing perspective, zero. And so that, to corroborate what Sarah's saying in that front, at least, like there is no competing threat picture.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, did we just lose all the information? I mean, we used to have the hide cameras, you know, that would scan the retina, and then there would be, why are you laughing?
Well, we left the hide behind, so Taliban has the hide systems.
Do we still have access to that system at all?
We have the old data of the system, so we have access. So we do
have something to bounce it off of.
Well, some files were lost from it. We have some, but we don't have the full set. I don't want to say what's missing because I don't want the Taliban to know, but we don't have 100%.
But there are new terrorists emerging, Shawn.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, do we have any database to bounce when they pick somebody up? Do we have any data to bounce that off of?
Yes, but it's not complete. Systems? Even dated isn't complete.
Here's another problem we have this terrorism problem, the ones that are already in the United States and the ones that the administration is arresting and deporting right now. We have that. At the same time, no one is discussing the fact that there are new ones coming to Europe, to America. I mean, Sirajuddin Haqqani, he needs no introduction. He's the wanted terrorist. He's the man issuing passports, Afghan passports, and travel documents. 7 million Afghan passports were printed in Europe after 2021 and shipped to Afghanistan.
7 million.
7 million with the permission granted by the United States State Department. We are still they're probably going to print 1 million more passports this year, more than 1 million. The permission to whether print or not comes from the United States State Department. They're granting permissions. We all know where the passports go, to Sirajuddin Haqqani, because Afghanistan cannot produce its own passport booklets, just like it cannot produce its own currency.
This was the father of suicide bombing in Afghanistan.
Yes, killed over 1,000 American service members in Afghanistan.
You know,
he's still wanted by the FBI and the State Department. In fact, I don't think the State Department, because Ambassador Karen Decker was recently on a episode, Afghan news show, Amu TV. My friend Sameh Mahdi, he asked her, he said, is Sirajuddin Haqqani still a terrorist? Is the State Department still looking for him? She says she cannot answer these questions. She refuses to call Haqqani a wanted terrorist.
Wow.
And the worst part is, right, they're issuing these passports to terrorists, and that's not just words. I have seen Algerians' faces on Afghan passports. I've obviously seen Libyan faces on Afghan passports.
Iranians.
Syrian faces on Afghan passports. we're also not treating these passports as compromised, which is insane, right? So they don't even act like the Afghan passport's compromised, even though any terrorist can travel to Afghanistan and get their name changed and their face put on one of these passports.
You when we were in Vienna and we interviewed Masood, right? You know, one of the things that he said both on and off camera was to really, really pay attention to surrogates, to really pay attention to, he said, you know, al-Qaeda and the Taliban have learned a lot. They are not going to allow themselves to be at the forefront. And then he even said, ISIS is more than happy to do that. You know, he said this back in June. I've had Salih has said the same thing. I mean, very, very well-placed individuals who are cautioning us about this role of surrogates and that what you see is not exactly what you get. And these warnings are coming from the same people who warned us pre 9/11, you know, and we ignored it. You know, we ignored it and we look at the strategic surprise and how our world changed. And I think that's what, at least for me, that's where I'm coming from. I mean, you know, honest to God, I don't even maintain a clearance anymore. You know, I don't. I left the military in 2013. I retired and was happy to do so. Had a good run and, you know, pursuing other things. But a whole bunch of veterans have been drawn back into this thing. And the stuff that we're talking about is not even on the high side security stuff. Like, it's not. It is not even in, as Sarah said, it's not in the IC channels. These are conversations that are happening in real time between veterans and abandoned assets that, for the best I can tell, this has not been consolidated with the intelligence community in a meaningful way since the abandonment. And so if we don't do that, how in the world are we going to actually have any kind of a responsible threat picture on what's coming our way? And how can we say with certainty that we do? That's my point, you know, because until that reckoning happens, you've got literally two different worlds here.
Yeah, and there's one other piece a lot of people don't talk about. It's the fact that the U.S. government, let's say if it's the CIA, the State Department, doesn't really matter. That official relationship is with the Taliban, right? So if you're a volunteer and you're talking to a former CIA source and he's giving you valid information, you're trying to pass that to the U.S. government, they want his identity to then give to the Taliban, right? He ends up dead. So there isn't even a safe way for our former sources to get information to the U.S. government due to the compromised relationship with the Taliban, particularly with Sirajuddin Haqqani.
Let's say that, I don't believe this, but let's assume for a second that the Taliban will remain a proxy of the United States and the United States will continue to work with them. Well, as the sole superpower of the world, shouldn't the United States government have a plan B and plan C, collect from multiple sources? You know, the resistance is that alternative. And knowing the leadership of multiple resistance fronts, I can tell you that there is zero connections. They're not communicating.
Where are we with the funding? You're the one that broke 40 million a week. Then we brought on Sarah that said 40 to 87 million a week.
Right, but we actually did, like the third week of January, we did a really good deep dive into the money coming in that week. And that week, the third week of January, was 105 million US dollars.
Wow.
That week. So I even think saying 87 is low at this point. And that doesn't count the money we also ship to Qatar, because remember, we also fund the Taliban's office in Doha, and that's 10 million more a month. So even the money we talk about that comes on the airplane is not all of it. And that's another thing our government needs to be honest about. There are a lot of pockets of money going to the Taliban.
Wow. We really started a conversation here with the three of you guys about that. Tim Burchett got involved. Eli Crane got involved. Marjorie Taylor Greene was at the last press conference, from what I understand. I talked to Tim Sheehy, the senator out of Montana. He's aware of it. He was introducing it into the Senate. I mean, what's the headway on this?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for taking that initiative. I'm telling you, Shawn, without you and your supporters who made calls and wrote letters to Congress, we would not have had this much movement. This would not have gotten anywhere because, initially they denied sending money to the Taliban and they attacked us. They said we were lying. Mm-hmm. And then this continued all the way until the former Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, was testifying, and he finally admitted that, yes, we gave a few $1 million to the Taliban, right? And then, anyways, it's
been everywhere. Everybody's aware of it.
Oh, at this point, there is no denying it. There's no denying it. Everyone admits, even President Trump said that, yes, the money does end up going to the Taliban and is going to the Taliban.
I brought it up in his interview.
Yep.
Yes, you did.
And Elon Musk has now repeated it too. So, and that's all came out of this show.
I have so much to thank you for. And officially, on behalf of the entire resistance, on behalf of President Saleh, Commander Massoud, let me thank you once again for taking that cause. It means a lot. It's very troubling that U.S. taxpayer money goes to the very individuals who killed not only Afghans, but American soldiers as well. The bill is H.R. 260, No Tax Dollars for Terrorists Act. Congressman Tim Burchett, we could not have done this without him. He's an amazing human being. He's become a very good friend. I have to say this as well. His entire office have been professional and very helpful, whether it be his district office in Knoxville or D.C. office. John, Kelsey, Pruitt, everyone was super helpful in this legislation. It is waiting for the Speaker of the House to put it on the House floor so members of Congress could vote on it. For some reason, it's being delayed, and I don't know why. No one knows why. The bill is ready. It's a great bill. It covers not only the fact that the money is going to the Taliban, but I'll add another thing. Do you remember when Secretary Blinken was testifying and Congressman Tim Burchett asked him, you're giving money to the Taliban? He said, oh no, we're not giving money to the Taliban. We're giving money to the NGOs. Well, he wasn't lying, but at the same time, he wasn't being truthful. He did not say that those NGOs are all Taliban fronts, that they give aid, they distribute, and that's a whole different story. Congressman Tim Burchett's bill, this new bill that he has introduced, No Tax Dollars for Terrorists Act, it includes the NGOs, it includes the Afghan fund that is being managed by Afghan Americans who are pro-Taliban and Taliban supporters, and it covers the $40 million. We need this bill to pass. All Speaker Johnson has to do is put it up for a vote on the House floor so members could vote on it.
I talked to Tim a couple of weeks ago, and he said that the holdup seemed to be, and that Mike Johnson was on board with this, is that they didn't want to attach anything else to the bill, so that to give somebody a reason to vote against it. Because Tim had said, we have to get this bill in as a single bill without all the other stuff attached to it, so that he nor anybody who's against this has to vote against the bill, then rewrite it up and bring it out again. And he had told me that Mike Johnson seemed to be on board with that, and that was maybe kind of the holdup, is that they need to introduce it as a single bill so that everybody can vote against it, and they can hold people accountable that don't vote against it and get it out there without giving them the excuse of, oh, well, this other thing that was attached to the bill, we're not for that, so we had to vote against it. Otherwise, this other thing would have happened.
All I know is the bill is ready. It's a very good bill, and Senator Tim Sheehy also introduced a carbon copy of this bill at the Senate. Mm-hmm. So both bills are ready. It's just waiting for Senator John Thune and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to put it up for a vote. And I hope they do.
Is that's the latest?
That's the latest.
That's the latest.
But a lot of members of Congress supported it. Congressman Eli Crane was very helpful. I was in D.C. with him not too long ago. He was very helpful. Chairwoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was very helpful. Anna Paulina Luna was helpful, and a few others. But once again, I want to thank you and Congressman Tim Burchett for this initiative.
Bring it for a vote. Hashtag it.
Yeah, hashtag it. Let's take a quick break. When we get back, let's talk about, what communities can do. It's at the top level. In my opinion, we've done everything we can do to get it at the top level. It is all the way to the top. It's in every agency. It's everywhere. Everybody's aware. And so it's kind of, it's out of our hands. We've done everything we can do. And unless you guys have something that I'm not thinking of.
I mean, there's members of the administration that have reached out wanting our perspective. And I mean, I find that encouraging. And I think there'll be an opportunity to do that. And then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, but really, at least the last month or two, my main focus has been helping communities, right? That's why we're here also briefing your community, because it's more than a duty to warn, right? We want to get Americans prepared. If nothing comes down from the federal government, we don't care. As long as you are aware and and you're preparing your community, that's what we need to be doing right now.
It's like a duty to warn up and a duty to prepare down.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're on the prepare piece.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a quick break. Now is the perfect time for a little spring cleaning, starting with your kitchen. Level up your cooking game with Hexclad, the best pans I've ever owned. Hexclad is like your favorite cast iron skillet, but without the mess. It's got the durability of stainless steel, the nonstick magic of a nonstick pan. It's sleek, and I really love that it does exactly what it promises. No more scraping burned food off the pan. You can just toss it right in the dishwasher. And Hexclad's Japanese Damascus steel knives are sharp and tough, perfect for leveling up your meal prep. Hexclad's products come with a lifetime warranty and literally the last time you'll ever have to buy these kitchen essentials. It's time to leave behind the delivery fees in that scratched up pan you've been clinging to since college. This year, cook like a pro. For a limited time only, our listeners get 10% off your order with our exclusive link. Just head to hexclad.com/SRS. Support our show and check them out at hexclad.com/SRS. Make sure you let them know we sent you. Bon appetit. Let's eat with Hexclad's revolutionary cookware. Can you believe it's 2025? I'm amazed every year to see how much my kids have grown. Take the guesswork out of planning your family's financial security like I did with Fabric by Gerber Life. I've been telling you, and it's true, Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance you can get done right from your couch, all online, and on your schedule. You could be covered in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget, like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Fabric works for me because there's no risk. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can cancel at any time. Fabric is more than life insurance. Free digital wills and more, and manage it all right from your phone. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Shawn. That's meetfabric.com/Shawn. MEET fabric.com/Shawn. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, we're back from the break. We were just talking about the funding. Is it stopping? Where's it at? What are they using this funding for?
A lot of things. Well, let me first tell you how the Taliban profit from this money, if you let me. The money basically goes from the U.S., cash $40 million a week, to Soleimani in Iraq. Cash is loaded on charter planes and it arrives at Kabul International Airport, which is under the control of Sirajuddin Haqqani. From there, a convoy arranged by Haqqani takes the $40 million, takes it to the Afghanistan International Bank, which is not a Taliban bank, it's just a normal bank. But they don't have the authorization to convert the US dollars to Afghanis. So what AIB, Afghanistan International Bank, does is they give the money to the Taliban-controlled Central Bank of Afghanistan, which is like our Federal Reserve. The Central Bank of Afghanistan is currently managed and run by Nur Ahmad Agha, a sanctioned terrorist who was sanctioned by the United States for financing bomb attacks against American soldiers, which killed many American soldiers. He's still sanctioned, and he gets $40 million at this point. he has monopoly over Afghanistan's the money market rates. And so during the conversion, he invites members that are companies that are affiliated with the Haqqani network and senior leadership of the Taliban, money exchangers. And they come and they all bid on who wants to buy each dollar and for how much. And so the winners every week are individuals associated with the Haqqani network. And because they control the money market, they basically take a cut right there. And then the Afghanis are given back to the Afghanistan International Bank, which then deposits the money into the bank accounts of these NGOs. Now, there are about 2,500 or so Afghan NGOs and about 300 international NGOs, including American NGOs. Now, these Afghan ones, every last one of them, their licenses and permits to operate were given to them by the Taliban. And I've said this to you previously. If you go and you open an NGO in Afghanistan, the Taliban will not give you a license because you're anti-Taliban. So all of those NGOs are pro-Taliban. They're sympathetic towards the Taliban and they get their licenses. Now, at this point, these NGOs, they have to order goods and services, right? So what they do is they... let's say 50% of the material that they need comes from abroad and 50% they purchase from Afghanistan. Rice, wheat, flour, oil, medicine. They can only purchase from a pre-approved, a list of vendors that are given to these NGOs by the Taliban. So the NGOs cannot buy from Mullah Shawn Ryan's Afghan store. They can only buy from that particular store that is operated by the Taliban. Now, the other rest of the materials that they need usually comes from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Dubai, but you cannot buy those in Afghanis. You can only buy those in dollars. So these NGOs, they reconvert the money through the Central Bank of Afghanistan, and during the second conversion, the Taliban take another cut. Then the money is deposited to move to UAE, to Dubai. The bank that moves this money is called Azizi Bank. It's not even a bank, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's a bank that is managed by the Taliban. Money arrives in Dubai, and then these NGOs order bulk, like several tons of rice and wheat and medicine, medical equipment, and they transfer those materials in bulk to Kabul International Airport. The company that brings these for these NGOs is Habibiyar Group. Habibiyar Group is owned partially by the brother of the current foreign minister of Taliban. And so he takes a cut. He charges for his services. The moment this material, the aid, lands at Kabul International Airport, the Taliban charge customs and taxes and fees, right? So that's where they take another cut. And then the aid arrives at the offices of the NGOs, which then they distribute. Now, who do they distribute the aid to? To a list of hungry and poor Afghans provided to the NGOs by the Taliban. So the list will have 5 poor and hungry Afghans, and then it will have 95 Taliban fighters, families of suicide bombers receive aid. This is all from U.S. tax dollars.
I'm just curious, is this coming through USAID?
Yes.
And so is it a matter, I mean, we've seen Doge is pretty much dismantling USAID. And they're uncovering all these things, spreading the LGBTQ agenda, the Sesame Street stuff. I mean, it's just ridiculous thing. Probably some type of affront or code name or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, is it just a matter of time before they reach this, before Doge reaches this?
You will see a lot of stuff coming out about this and related to Afghanistan and USAID, Shawn. See, in Bamiyan province, which does not have a lot of Taliban support historically, USAID would go and distribute the aid. You will see the logo of USAID all over. And Mr. Saleh exposed this. His intelligence exposed this. So these NGOs affiliated with USAID, they would distribute the aid to the people there alongside the leader of the Taliban, one of the commanders for Bamiyan province. And they would distribute the aid not in the name of the generosity of the American people or in the name of Joe Biden. They would distribute the aid in honor of Mullah Hibatullah and the Taliban. In Panjshir, they're still doing that. In Panjshir province, which, as you know, has zero Taliban. They are pro-resistance. They're sympathetic towards the resistance. What the Taliban does is they go with this NGO called Ansar, which operates in Panjshir province and Andarab province, Andarab Valley. They will go to this house and there's a lineup of Afghans and widows. And they have envelopes with $200 cash per family, per poor family. And they will tell them, hey, Mr. Panjshiri, during the days of the Republic, did those infidel republics that were puppets of America, did they ever come and give you aid? You know, unlike them, see, the leader of the Taliban loves you so much, he's giving you aid, he's sending you money. The U.S. aid, U.S. cash in Afghanistan is distributed in honor of Mullah Hibatullah, not in the name of the generosity of the American people. Even U.S. aid packages that go to Afghanistan, the U.S. flag is missing from it. See, in Latin America and Africa and elsewhere around the world, when U.S. aid is distributed, aid packages, there's always an American flag with a message from the American people. Not in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. They do not want people to know that this aid comes from the American people. They say this aid comes from Mullah Hibatullah.
Well, I think what I'm kind of alluding to here is maybe if we get Doge's attention, then they focus on this.
Well, not exactly, because so even if you dismantle USAID, they move key programs then to the State Department, and it's managed and run by the State Department. So unless the State Department is told to stop funding the Taliban, that money will not stop. Doge will not stop that money because now it's under the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And again, that's going to take congressional action. Doge is not going to stop this money we're talking about.
How do they stop the other stuff then?
The other stuff is more like small grants and stuff.
I don't know if it's small.
Well, no, but I know, but I'm like, this is a systematic deal set into place that Congress has to demand, and that's why Burchett's doing it. Congress has to stop this money.
Okay.
Period. I mean, you know, maybe they'll stop. There's a few little projects. USAID has this hemp project in Afghanistan. Stopping that'll be great, and hopefully Doge finds that one, etc. But it's not going to curb this. And then, you know, then we have the counterterrorism dollars, which I'll explain when he finishes the humanitarian dollars, because that's a whole nother pocket.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and they were sending money. USAID was sending money to Afghanistan to teach women. I mean, I think they paid $60 million to teach Afghan women farming. The Taliban don't even allow Afghan women to leave their homes.
That was the Department of Defense that did the $60 million. That wasn't even USAID.
Under Operation Sentinel.
So the Department of Defense is also giving the Taliban money that nobody discusses. But like he said, last year, they said they gave $60 million for women's education when women can't go to school.
They gave $11 million for the Taliban to register their broken arms.
So we don't just have a problem with USAID. We don't just have a problem with State Department. We have a problem with the money the Department of Defense is giving to the Taliban. We have a problem with money CIA is giving to the Taliban. And we have to be honest about all these pockets of money because you can't stop them if you don't discuss all of them.
As we say, Shawn, this has to be an act of Congress. This has to be No Tax Dollars for Terrorists Act, which I once again call on His Excellency Speaker Mike Johnson to put it up for a vote. Let members vote on it. This needs to stop.
Okay.
Now, when we take it a step further, like I told you, some of the humanitarian dollars goes to these foreign fighters, but the counterterrorism dollars come in as U.S. cash, and they go all over the place. And we've discussed it before, but they go into a number of these plots, to include the Homeland plot, and then they do shady stuff, like Legend said, they bring it through the ZZ Bank, and there's a lot of money laundering to support the plot in the United States. But the money also goes to other plots against Americans, just not in the United States. So some of them they have multiple embassy plots that we've talked about previously. So they'll take physical US dollars cash from Afghanistan, bring it to Africa. So they're funding 2 plots right now with US dollars against US embassies in Africa. It's against our US embassy in Bamako and Mali. And then the biggest concern right now is some plotting against the US embassy and our personnel in Mogadishu, Somalia, because that's one of the next pushes of the caliphate plan, is to push the US government out of Somalia, and Somalia fall to al-Shabaab or ISIS, but it's really part of al-Qaeda's caliphate plan, just like Syria was. So we are actually funding, with these dollars we send to fight ISIS, plots against us in Africa, of all places, besides here in the homeland. I mean, it's insane that we're funding these incidents that are going to kill Americans, because think of how that's going to come back, right? We have some Americans die, let's say in Mogadishu, we have a bombing go off in Virginia, and then when you track the money down, the money came from the US government. But think of how Americans are going to handle this. And that's what the terrorists want. Mm-hmm. They want you to blame your government. And that's why Congress needs to act immediately, because they're complicit. Every day they allow it, they're going to be complicit.
Scott, I want to go into communities. What can communities do? But right before we get there, I know you and Sarah have been working on this book, The Gathering Storm, to warn local communities, to kind of give them some insight on what's coming in what they can do, at the local level. But it sounds like some of the other stuff that you guys covered in that book is dissecting some of the other acts of terrorism that we've seen throughout the globe, Mumbai, the Russian Mall, October 7th. Yep. When you dissected those with your counterparts, what are some of the commonalities and some of the things that you found?
Well, it started when you and I were talking about, you asked a question about, okay, so what do communities do? And that, you and I went back and forth on it a little bit, but what it really opened up was a really broad conversation that's still ongoing, where individuals and communities, I know they started hitting you up, they started hitting me up, they started hitting Sarah up. What do we do in our community? How do we defend our synagogue or our church or our place of worship? Is this something we should be thinking about? And we talked about it, and just the way I look at it is I believe we're at a crossroads right now. When we think about everything that we talked about here today, you look at the threat picture that the government has on terrorism. You look at what the Global War on Terror veterans are saying, and it's different. And we're at a crossroads. And you either believe at this point that there is a viable threat against the homeland that is complex, local, distributed, looks more like October 7 than it does 9/11, that is very likely in the next year or two, or you don't. And if you don't, okay, like Godspeed. But if you do, where we were, okay, then perhaps in addition to the analysis, we should start until we do bring this together with our government, which we've really got to have that private-public relationship on an unprecedented scale. What could we, if it's a duty to warn up, maybe it's a duty to prepare down and in, and how could we help that conversation? So we started looking at, what if we just self-published a book that really just looked at not just the threat analysis, but scenarios that have happened in the past of where we get hit or other places get hit where they live, work, and play. And so we put together this small book, and borrowing from Winston Churchill when he tried to warn of the gathering storm in World War II. That's what we named this project, The Gathering Storm. And we just looked at, and so for my part in it and a couple other contributors, we looked at case studies. So a lot like how U.S. Army Special Ops Command and others do case studies, and they'll migrate those practical lessons learned into operators' modern times. That's what we did. And we just looked at unclassified. We looked at the DC sniper. We looked at the Bedouin school siege with the Chechens, where they moved children, over 1,000, into a gymnasium and threw explosives up on the basketball goals and held terrain and held the Russian special ops at bay. We looked at Mumbai, which is a very compelling version of what Sarah and others have warned about in 2008, where, roughly 10 terrorists locked down a city of 19 million doing complex attacks, holding terrain, killing well over 100 people. And it was almost a foreshadowing of what we think we could expect here in the Homeland. And we October 7, New Orleans. So we looked at all these, and what we did was we started to pull out a lot of the commonalities that individuals and communities should be thinking about. And I'll kind of throw it back to you there, and we can go deeper on any of those things that you want, because there were a lot of lessons learned, I think, that are super helpful. But one of the things that we came out of it with, Shawn, that surprised me was, one, the relative ease of finding people who were on the ground or who responded to those events. I mean, even Mumbai, October 7, just doing peer-to-peer discussions on lessons learned was super eye-opening, and I think something that's available to law enforcement, emergency operations centers across the country. That's number one. And number two, I think the thing that surprised me was we came up with a lot more questions than we did answers. And just like yesterday when we were talking to the sheriff's department in your county, it's different in every county. It's different in every municipality, because context is everything. But if these attacks are going to be locally manifested, then that's where the conversations need to start, because that's going to be the real resilience in that. So we came away with a lot of questions, and where we didn't have the answers, we just put the questions in there. Here's what communities should be asking themselves, and hopefully more books will be written that are, technically specific on those questions, and we just keep it going. So that's the project, and happy to jump into any parts about it. Because like I said, between the intel contributors and the operators, that a lot of good stuff came out of it, a lot of lessons.
What are some of the top lessons? Without dissecting all of it, what are some of the top lessons?
I would say probably at an individual level, the first thing is, to do your own research, to not let fear dominate, but to question things, to question what we're saying, to look at a lot of these case studies, to look at a lot of the examples on your own. I think that for you and your family, this is not just terrorism, this is any crisis, but certainly for terrorism, I think you should look at the threat itself, and then you should look at scenarios that have been similar to that. And between those two things, you can derive a lot of insights on kind of what you should be doing. Some of the preparation things that came out of it were thinking about how would these scenarios unfold? Like, look at your daily pattern of life. What are the local cafes that you go to? Where is your local movie theater? Where's your daycare? Where do your kids go to school? What are the gatherings that you typically go to throughout the year? Do you go to a lot of concerts? Do you go to ball games? And I think starting to just look at those with intention and starting to ask yourself hard questions about, okay, if I looked at, for example, the Nova Music Festival, I look at the Crocus City Music Hall where ISIS hit. What are things that I can derive from that I could look at the places that I go to is there actually a security plan here? If not, who should I be talking to about this? Can we get the community together to talk about this? Should I go engage local law enforcement and call a community meeting? So I think my big takeaway for individuals is look at the scenarios that have already happened, because that takes the fear away, I think, and really puts agency back in ourselves to just look pragmatically at things that have happened in the past.
Well, thank you guys for the briefing yesterday. I mean, we went to my local sheriff, very receptive. I was really happy with how that went. I want to do everything I can to protect the community that I live in, and all the kids and the people who live here. And they seemed very receptive. There was my county's police, or my city's police department, the county sheriff's office, neighboring PDs. And then we even had, quite a different federal agencies and state agencies in there. Department of Higher Education was in there. And I think, back to you, what are the questions? I mean, I think that's how you start the discussion, is you come up, at least that's how we did it in special operations.
100%.
You have to put yourself in the terrorist mindset of how would they do this? If I wanted to strike terror, hit multiple targets, kill as many people as possible, how would I do it?
Yeah.
And so what are some of the questions that communities should be asking?
Right. So here's a couple, and again, what I found to be extremely useful was bringing in, just in special forces, and I know you guys did this in the teams as well. So before you go down range, and this is both post and pre 9/11, but before you go down range, you would usually go over and meet with, the team or the platoon that just got back. You'd sit down with them. Our engineer sergeant would sit with the engineer sergeant. I would sit with the detachment commander. The intel guys would sit together. They would do, one-on-one debriefs of what they saw, and the incoming guys would take notes. And then we do kind of a collective thing. And it just was what you did. But I think you can migrate that same thing. You can bring in, for example, Duran Kaidar, an Israeli Special Forces NCO from the IDF, is traveling around the U.S. right now talking to churches about his lessons learned from responding October 7th. He was at the Nova Music Festival. He went into those neighborhoods that were slaughtered. And so he can give you really, really insights into, if you subscribe to the notion that that could happen here and is somewhat imminent, then he can tell you the things that he saw. Then you derive questions such as, how would we handle in this county an incident where groups of 8 to 10 well-trained terror operatives donned first responder uniforms? How would we handle that as a community? Wow. How would we communicate that to a community? How would first responders actually talk to themselves on the fact that that was happening? And is there a way that they could overcome that with a different uniform or something? Like, I don't know the answer, but that is a legitimate question, right? Another question that came up a lot that I think is really powerful is, how would our community to respond if the terror attack happened in such a way that there was complete paralysis across all first responders? If you had systemic paralysis in all of my case study interviews, you had systemic paralysis for at least 24 to 48 hours where there was no real response. So why was that? Because they were just overwhelmed. In some cases, they were targeted. In October 7, first responders, they ran right at them and they took them out. And so they were not, and then you had reinforcements coming. There was so much confusion. Plus you had the terror groups actually in first responder uniforms, right? So it was just complete chaos. And so and then some areas were cut off where they held terrain. Like in Mumbai, they held terrain. In Bedouin School, they put basketball goals with explosives on them and the children in the middle. How are you going to assault that? So these are the things that, just by looking at the scenarios, it's just, you know what it is? It's so hard to look at, in my assessment. I mean, I was sitting across from this Special Forces soldier who responded to October 7, and he could barely form a coherent sentence. He was so upset. And this is a guy that's been operating for decades, and he couldn't even speak because of what he'd seen. It's so hard to look at. But honestly, I don't know how we can avoid that, but if we can start to derive some really, really poignant questions. And we put a ton of them in the book. But those are some of the ones that came up.
Yeah, and some other really interesting points is, right, we know, at least from the training in Afghanistan, what pieces of it'll look like, right? So there's one piece kind of also pulled from Mumbai, is the idea of these like attackers who fight to the death, right? Because it's not like in Israel, you'll go and do an attack, you can grab, kidnap someone and leave and go back into Gaza. When they come in the United States, they're here to do the attack and they're here to die, right? There's no exit plan, right? So now we need to talk to law enforcement, like, what's it like to fight someone who wants to fight to the death? And how do we learn that? Okay, we go into our community, we talk to people who fought in Ramadi, in Fallujah, bring them in, have them talk, be consultants, advisors, tell us what it was like to fight that enemy. We can do that. Another really big piece is suicide bombers, right? That they plan to do suicide bombings here. Well, what do we need to learn about suicide bombings? Because we don't have suicide bombings in our community, even simple things. What kind of standoff should we just have from a metal detector? We should start those standoffs now, right? Because then if the bomber gets freaked out, blows up, you save lives just by putting a standoff going up to the metal detector. So if we start understanding these things, we can put little things in place that do save lives.
And I interviewed several intelligence analysts from the IDF, and I just asked them, at the end, I said, what would you say to American analysts, law enforcement? And 4 separate ones that I interviewed, they all, first of all, they sat there for like an uncomfortable period of time. Like, you could tell they were wanting to say something, and then finally they were just like, fuck it, I'm going to say it. And what they said was, essentially, we live this every day. Like, we live this in our communities. We're always facing this imminent threat. It's something that we've kind of come to terms with. And we were completely caught off guard. Like, we were not ready for this. We were not ready for what came our way. And they came across, they came across the border, and then they went back. They said to me, you all have not even allowed yourself to even think about this. They have been among you for 4 years. It is going to be 10x what they did to us on October 7th. To the man and the woman, they said that. And they all were separate interviews.
Wow.
And when al-Qaeda planned this, remember the Hamas attacks they were involved in planning, they planned the U.S. Homeland attack to be 10 times the size of the Hamas attacks. To them, the Hamas attacks was the dress rehearsal. So we have to remember the attack on us is going to be a lot larger.
And again, I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. But it's just all of the different points. It's the different points of interviews that I've conducted, including with these case studies. And if you even just consider the fact that one law enforcement officer that does a lot of tactical training around the country, he watches your show diligently, and he contacted me and he said, Scott, I train all over the country. I train SWAT teams, advanced tactics. He said, I'm telling you right now, we're not ready for this in terms of response, primarily because the typical scenario that we deal with are single shooters.
Yep, one active shooter.
We do not deal with teams of 8 to 10 that are prepared to fight to the death. In Mumbai, for example, in 2008, there were 35 candidates that tried out that were initially groomed for the role. 10 were selected. 9 of the 10 fought to the death. They knew that they were not coming out. Right. And so we've just never faced anything with that. And then if you look at, for example, the Crocus City Music Hall or the Crocus Music Hall just recently where ISIS hit in Russia, that was a complex attack where they had incendiary devices. They set the place ablaze. They were extremely well armed with long guns and short guns, grenades, and they were taking the time to cut throats as they went, and making sure that it was covered and amplified. So you're talking about extremely well-trained individuals who are prepared to die and who frankly know what they're doing. And we don't think about that. We don't train that way. And I'm not saying that to create panic. I'm saying that's just a pragmatic responsibility that in this day and age that we live in, and particularly considering our border's been open for 4 years, how could we assume that has not happened? I mean, even if you didn't have the GWAT veteran reporting that you have, knowing the mandate that groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda have against our, demise, like, why would we not assume that number of people are here prepared to do that? I mean,
we've seen how effective the training is. I mean, the last time Sarah was on, she gave us a clip. We'll roll it again right now. But I mean, in my 14 years of being over there, I've never seen a combatant move like that or shoot like that. And, go ahead. Yeah, no, and then another really interesting thing when he brings up the ISIS Russia attack. So they trained multiple teams for that attack. And the first team essentially got thwarted and wrapped up. So the Russians thought they stopped the plot. And then those guys came in and basically did that attack, which is very smart. And we're not used to those kind of tactics. Backup teams for these plots. That's a new thing. So we can even have people in the government, and we do have people they picked up 8 ISIS guys last year and think they thwarted the Homeland plot. So the terrorists are also doing things to make you think, okay, you're ahead of the game. You stop this. And then they had a whole backup team that went in and successfully did that attack.
And I think you have to think about, I'll just say this real quick. It's just, we have to assume, I think another thing is strategic surprise. If you look at, if you just study these groups, they are very good at not just tactical surprise, but strategic surprise, where they surprise the nation. They surprise the larger body at scale. And when that happens, what follows is a level of institutional paralysis. Everything's locked, everything's paralyzed, and so when that happens, you've got these groups that are capable of what my buddy Dave at the agency calls not terrorism, but horrorism. They're able to bring a level of just unmitigated horror at an interpersonal level, and then they'll even amplify it with body cams. So you're not, it's strategic surprise, strategic paralysis, hold ground, mass casualties, that kind of event. We've just never dealt with that here, and I think we're due. I just do. I don't think that you're going to see. One law enforcement officer that I interviewed told me, he said, I was in DC for the 9/11 attack. He said I was like 2 blocks from the Pentagon. Right. And he said, you know, that attack happened, explosion, F-16s flying supersonic just above the treetops. And right over here, the McDonald's was still open. People still getting food, you know, but yet when the DC sniper, 2 dudes in the back of a car for 3 weeks, he was there for that too. The entire city was paralyzed and locked down. People on a knee getting gas, you know, kids not going outside to play. And he said, that's the difference. You know, that's the difference is when there's the spectacular thing that's over there, but then there's where you live and you work and you play. And they have figured that out. If you look at their attacks over the last, 10 years, every single time, it's local, complex attacks right where we live, work, and play.
You know that while you guys were talking, you mentioned the video of the Taliban fighters who are on the range showing off their tactics. A few things you should know about them, Shawn. They were trained, most of them were trained by the U.S. Special Operations Community while we were there. Some were evacuated to the United States by the Biden administration, and then they decided to go back. They decided to go back and join the Taliban. So some of those guys you see, they're the returnees. Mm-hmm. Some of them, they get debriefed. They get briefed all over again by the Taliban, by Haqqani, and are sent back to the United States. So don't think that that individual you see in the range is only in Afghanistan. No, they're going back and forth. There are Afghan Americans from California, from Tennessee, from Florida, from New Jersey, New York, that have went back and joined the Taliban, that are serving with the Taliban right now. And these folks go back and forth.
You know, I know you briefed a couple governors, you briefed local PDs, sheriff's offices, I don't know who else, but, you know, one of the things, and I don't know if this came out of this or not, what you guys are doing, but it's like Florida seems to be kind of leading the way with this, they've set up the National Guard Special Missions Unit where they've utilized a lot of special operations veterans is kind of like a volunteer special unit task force, special missions unit task force. And so I'm hoping they do that here. Are you guys getting any? I mean, that just seems like a great way because even yesterday during the briefing, it was you know, allocation of resources seemed to be like the primary concern, right? Yeah. And how are they gonna? I mean, and that's something that all these communities need to be thinking about. Is, you know, I mean, look, police are already understaffed, right? Because the last 4 years, the defund the police thing, and so you really, you know, PDs, sheriff's offices, even at the federal, state levels, you know, they need to be thinking about allocation of resources and how fast those resources are going to be used up. And so you need to be thinking about neighboring PDs, neighboring sheriff's offices, state assets, federal assets, and how we can help each other. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. You can even look at, you know, so for example, some of the things that we looked at were like Western North Carolina hurricane. The chemical spill in East Palestine, Ohio. Like those are not terror events, but what they were situations where a crisis expended the capability of the organic response force in minutes. Like that, you know, they couldn't respond. They were not effective. And so what you saw were individuals and communities that were on their own. And then you also saw, and this is what I call the GWAT X factor, right? You saw these global war on terror individuals responding, you know, either from the local area or even trucking in and responding. And it started with the Afghanistan collapse, but it's been happening, the fires in West Maui, the Western North Carolina hurricanes. So there's kind of some new stuff that's happening. And I guess where I'm going with that, Shawn, is that I think we have to look at this level of threat And it's kind of like I said, you either believe it's real or you don't. If you do, then you have to give it its credit and give the enemy a vote that this thing will massively exceed our organic capabilities within minutes. And if that's the case, then I think we have to have a paradigm shift in our private public partnership. The government and the communities, the government at all levels and the communities have to work together on a scale we've never done before, and that we usually only do after bang. I'm saying, and this is why I think Sarah's sense of urgency is so compelling, there's just not a lot of time. I think we have to assume that the 4 years of an open border, eye off the ball, like there's such an advance to us of where we are. So a lot of this is, how do we plan together? How do we work together? How do we look at global war on terror veterans being a part of this? You talked about the Florida piece, and I don't think you'll mind me saying this. Like, Sheriff Naco is in Pasco County is really good at engaging local veterans, and not just for their analytical skills on the intel side, but also their operational skills. Like Sarah said, they fought in Ramadi, they fought in Fallujah. They know how to do a threat vulnerability assessment of schools. So I just think it's kind of all hands on deck, man, honestly. But the asset that we have that we are not properly utilizing, our communities have a lot of potential. The top-down government has got to figure that out. They've got to include them in the discussion, and I think it's the best last chance we have.
I mean, GWAT veterans are, you've already covered this several times just on this specific show, but very open to help. They want to help. And so yesterday in the briefing, you had brought up, expect blockades, expect not to be able to reach the venues. And so, and I brought up, hey, I understand you guys, you don't have all the resources that you need, but you can utilize the local community. I mean, I brought it up, when I was in the SEAL teams in 2004, 16 guys, 16 guys went into Athens, and we developed 5 routes into every Olympic venue in Athens, outside of Athens, how we would get there. And not only that, I mean, guys that have done the job, how many times were you infilling a target, it was blocked, and then you had to deviate, find another route in? I mean, we're really good at this type of stuff. And so even if you can't allocate your officers to develop that plan, you can reach out to the community, have your community find the qualified people within the community. They're out there. There's a ton of them here, to develop just the routes. And I mean, and I know you're saying like, we don't have time. It's going to take time,
it will.
And you have to start somewhere. So I don't want it to seem like it's an impossible task. I mean, I think the important thing is just start.
I think it's just
start utilizing the community, develop the routes. You had talked about the communication piece and that it would be very likely there would be no comms. Immediately I brought up, hey, you can get comms, order some mini Starlinks, and at least you have communication from on site where the attack happened to headquarters, to the sheriff's department, to the PD, to whatever, and that's right there. You have open comms.
And this is why we did the Gathering Storm book the way we did, is because like exactly what you're doing is the way we present it. So we pose these questions and how can your community come together and start addressing these? I mean, look at how you arrived at that solution based on tactical experience where? In Athens. Mm-hmm. But that's all over the country. I mean, look at what the GWAT guys and girls did in the response to Western North Carolina. I was just up there interviewing a lady named Pastor Glenda, and she ministers to 2 congregations way up in the mountains where my family's from. And we went up there and we're going around, and I asked her, I said, what was support like in the first 2 weeks and it was devastating. She said, had it not been for the veterans, we wouldn't even have had food resupply. In the first 2 weeks. It was the only people we saw from the outside were veterans, and somehow they got to us. And my point is that is going to happen no matter what. These GWAT veterans, they have spent 20 years of their life doing this kind of work in a distributed, connected kind of way, and they're going to do it no matter what. If there's institutional paralysis, if there's a gap, they're going to fill it. So why not on your table exercises at a community level in the EOC, invite them in, huddle around the table and make it a true private public conversation around a community problem, you know? And I just think that nothing but goodness is going to come out of that. Like what you facilitated yesterday, in my assessment, is exactly the model of what we need.
Well, it gets people thinking. And so I kind of just want to go over everything that we talked about there yesterday. Like not only allocation of actual personnel, but resources, medical supplies.
Yeah.
I mean, Sarah and Boone just did a big event at a local church here where sounds like not even just local churches within this county were here, but all throughout the state came to listen to them speak. And so there are a lot of people that are taking this seriously and they just, they might not know the questions to ask. I mean, you go to a church down here, everybody's packing heat. I mean, everybody's armed, everybody's packing heat, but do they understand basic medical skills? Right. Even just slapping a tourniquet on, and so maybe PDs, I don't know who would fund it. But instead of, EMS is probably going to have even a tougher time getting there to triage and treat victims and casualties. Yeah. And so that means
they won't be able to. Remember, they have to wait till the scene is clear of a threat. So even after though, there's going to be traffic jams, roads are going to be blocked. Even if they didn't block the attack, they're going to, there's going to be traffic jams where you can't move because everybody's going to be in paralysis. And so even if it's just, hey, let's get 100 tourniquets and stash them in different churches. Let's get 100, or chest seals or bandages, all that kind of stuff. Because even if EMS doesn't arrive, guess what? There's gonna be medical professionals there that are survivors that will be able to treat. And if that communication can even just come out, because it's not 100% the comms are going to be shut down, but if the department, if they get a call and they say, hey, by the way, there's an entire medical cache of supplies stashed wherever in the janitor closet at a mall, or maybe you make it just open, just like they do with AEDs and that type of equipment. Hey, here's the medical supplies. We can't get there. Roads are blocked. You guys, we set up for this.
And it's absolutely. And it's not that hard to do because you can actually have these conversations. And I've sat in and participated in quite a few of them. And you don't see people in there panicking or wringing their hands. You see empowered neighbors just having a pragmatic conversation about a potential threat. But guess what? The worst thing that's going to happen probably if you go through that exercise is A, you're going to be connected more to your neighbor. And B, you're probably going to be ready for other contingencies that might happen. And I'll give you a case in point. I was interviewing some EOC representatives who responded to a flood in Ohio. They never saw it coming. It crested over its banks more than it had ever flooded. Little bitty town, like 20,000 people. And one of the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center members, was telling me that it was flooding so bad that they brought in firefighters from all over the surrounding counties, right, to come help. Well, they were doing boat rescue. So they all brought their boats, but none of their radios communicated to each other. So they had to put one fire department guy from the town in each boat so that they had a radio that worked. And it took them a long time to figure that out, but that was the solution they came up. The point was, had you just done an exercise ahead of time where you brought those folks together, you would have already sorted that out, right? And those are the kinds of things that when you add to the paralysis, just the horrorism that could be brought by this. Trying to solve a problem like that could take you days because of the trauma and just the inability to function and move. So I just think that the more that a lot of it is the communities coming together, again, private, public. It's got to be private sector too. It's got to be those GWAT veterans. It's got to be members of the community that normally maybe wouldn't be in there, and finding ways to talk left of bang. That's the critical part, because right of bang, Everybody's going to be well-intended and coming together, but zero capability. You build trust when risk is low. You leverage it when the stakes are high.
I mean, and then even just training, and I'm not talking about high tactics, clearing rooms, that kind of stuff. I mean, if you're a community leader, if you're a minister, if you're a pastor, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, if you're a manager of a Publix, a grocery store, I mean, a little bit of medical training can go a very, very long way. And there's always people that are interested in doing this. I mean, especially churches here, very involved in this stuff. I mean, Covenant shooting not too long ago just happened. There was another one in Antioch just happened a couple months ago, and people are tuned in right now.
Yeah.
And so use that.
Yeah. 100%.
Get your people trained up. At least it's that can mean life or death for a whole number of people.
And there's actually an amazing case study. If you actually look at the Las Vegas shooting where we lost, of course, hundreds of lives, they say 70% of the people who survived because the people in their vicinity had first aid training, and a lot of it was former military members. But those citizens stepped up and did the initial triage and the initial aid, and it saved 70% of those people. I mean, that's a huge number, and that alone should just get communities involved. Hey, if we know how to do this, look at the number of lives you save.
And again, to that, just a couple other lessons learned from that same event, right? A concert, the Route 19 Harvest Festival or Route 91 Harvest Festival, tens of thousands of people, single shooter from the Mandalay Hotel, right? I forget however many weapons he had. It was more than 10 with bump stocks. But while he was doing that, it took police over an hour to get into his room, and he was already dead. An hour. Single shooter. So again, if you just look at the level of paralysis that happens from that, you add to that 7 to 8, 10 well-trained operatives like you saw in that video, right? Who then hit multiple nodes at one time and who have a pre-existing mandate to hold terrain with explosives and children at a school. But if you're not tabletopping that, if we're not laying that on a tabletop exercise and SWAT teams talking through that with, others and what would we do if there were 2 locations that were locked down with hostages? Mm-hmm. I mean, you've exceeded scope and capacity immediately. So, how are you calling for, what does that look like? So I just think that, and these are just, you need the other thing that came out of this, Shawn, we talked about yesterday. I believe every emergency operations center, county sheriff should have a red cell. They should have a red cell that looks at threat-based scenario work, because both exist. And start looking at that and unpacking these different scenarios. Unpack October 7. Bring someone over from the IDF and let them give you a leadership professional development on what happened that day. Mm-hmm. And then ask yourself, what should our red cell be looking at? And then the last thing I'll say on this, state and local leaders. We don't have to wait on the federal government to authorize resources. Yes, you need it for reporting and things like that for agents to look at. But in terms of resources and just training allocation, after I was on with you and we talked about this, there was a law enforcement officer from the greater New Orleans area who reached out and petitioned his leadership for immediate counterterror training. It was denied. Uh-huh. This was 1 month before the January 1 attack.
I want to expound on the red cell stuff because I think a lot of people don't understand what red cell is. Basically penetration testing for whatever, could be venues, events, whatever. And so you're basically penetration testing, finding weaknesses within that venue. And even that, we brought up, hey, you don't have to allocate a bunch of on-duty officers to do penetration testing to different venues. You could have off-duty guys do it. You could have, deputized, whoever, just, hey, I just want to let you know, my guy walked in, had a gun, had a knife, had this, had that. Nobody checked me. I'm an off-duty cop. I'm allowed to carry anywhere, and I just want you to, hold the venues accountable, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like you were just talking about the basketball game at Chapel Hill. And, you know, I'd like to kind of wrap this up here, but I think, you know, another thing, maybe the most important thing is open the discussion within the community. And when I say that, it doesn't mean you have to have a podcast and scare the living shit out of everybody. Like, this is going to scare a lot of people. You know, it's also going to create a lot of discussion. And I'm not trying to say, hey, cause mass hysteria, but open the discussion in your communities. And even if it's just, hey, we're aware of the potential terrorism threat, and we're working on ways to mitigate that and to minimize it as much as possible. You don't have to talk about what you're doing. You don't have to be extremely descriptive of what may come, like what we just did. But it opens the discussion. It gets out on different channels. It gets out on the media. It gets out on social. And one thing that I think we can all agree on is these guys, they look for soft targets. And so if you harden your community, then guess what? They see that because these guys always surveil before they hit. Mm-hmm. They always do surveillance before they hit. That's surveillance on the internet. That's surveillance in person of venues, of people. And so if you create that discussion, however you do it, it gives the appearance that let's not hit this community. They're getting their shit together. It's a discussion. They're preparing for it. It pushes it over to the next county, pushes it over to the next state. If all the states do it, maybe we stay in Europe. I don't know. But, you know, my biggest concern is obviously my community. And I think everybody listening, that's their biggest concern too. And so open the discussion, get your citizens aware of it. And it also, you know, gives off the appearance, not just the appearance, that you're actually doing something to combat this, and you become a harder target. They want easy targets.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's precedence for this. So remember, the Pulse nightclub shooter, him and his wife did their surveillance on, Disney Springs, the downtown Disney area. They chose it as the target. When he went to do the attack, right, he had the gun in his stroller, and then there was too much Disney security that day. He got back in the car, drove around, thought of another venue, and then picked Pulse later on, right? Horrible thing happened, but Disney having their security and upping their posture from the time he surveilled and said, I'm going to do it, to going back and having more security, he said, okay, this isn't worth it for me. I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do, right? That is a case study of how it happens. Now, we all harden, right? We make all these targets more difficult. We keep thwarting them in that way. And remember, when people have to change the venue of their target, it might not be the same day like he did. They might have to do a week later. That gives law enforcement one more week to maybe identify him and thwart him, right? Because we want to thwart this plot. We want to stop it from happening. Buying time and making the terrorists have to hide out longer, spend more money, that helps us get them faster.
But if you're waiting for something from the top down, I don't think thwarting is an option. Mm-hmm. I think thwarting, just like throughout our history, it is usually community solutions that deal with a crisis, and certainly, getting left of bang, I think has got to start at a grassroots level, and we're capable of it. I mean, it's already happening. Mm-hmm. I think now it's just a matter of kind of, sharing, just kind of sharing the news on it. And one other thing that we're doing that seems to be working pretty well is we're putting people in the Task Force Pineapple signal room on Signal that started with the Afghanistan withdrawal. But now, you got sheriff deputies from Williamson County and Pasco County and EOC responders from Chicago, and they're networked on this Signal app, and they can talk and get to know each other now. We can broadcast training opportunities that are out there, or things that are coming out. It's pretty cool. And again, a lot of it started from these global war on terror veterans that they know how to stay connected and they move fast.
Mm-hmm. I think bottom line is these guys want to succeed. They want to succeed. And so if you harden your community, harden your school, harden your church, harden your household. I mean, I know I have a whole team of security now. I know you guys do too. And, when you do that, let's go somewhere where we're guaranteed success. That's how they think. That's just how they think. And so harden up the community, harden up the churches, harden up the schools, harden up the venues, harden up your households, and set that tone so that they see that and they will very likely move on.
And model what right looks like. That's doing the right thing. I think that models what right looks like to the federal government and to decision makers at the higher levels, right? I mean, we have a history of doing that in this country. And this is no different.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something, Shawn? This was an amazing conversation, by the way. I was listening. But, in 2025, Americans should not have to live in fear of IEDs and suicide bombings in America. And this is unfortunate, but it doesn't have to happen if everyone does their part. I mean, you guys are talking about how to protect these communities here, all the right things. But everyone else needs to do their part as well. And what I mean by that is there's no kind of hiding it anymore. These guys are claiming to do this in the name of Islam. I'm a Muslim, and I know for a fact that their actions has nothing to do with Islam. These guys have hijacked Islam and Islamic symbols, as I said earlier. Why is Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Egypt, these Muslim majority countries, why are they not taking the lead and stopping these guys there? I mean, we're doing everything we can to try to stop it here, but these guys are killing Christians in the name of Islam. They're killing Jews in the name of Islam. Saudi Arabia, the crown prince there, Mohammed bin Salman, he has this project, this Vision 2030. Basically, he's trying to show this moderate face of Islam and to show that what these individuals, these groups are doing has nothing to do with Islam. But at the same time, he's not taking any action, and I hope he does, against Qatar when they give offices to Hamas, to Taliban. UAE, claims UAE opened up a church in Dubai, and they claim they're so moderates. And I know the people in UAE are, but at the same time, just opening up one church doesn't mean that everything is good and everything is fine. Mm-hmm. UAE leadership is meeting with the leader of the Haqqani network. This hypocrisy is being noticed. Mm-hmm. And these leaders are not going to get away with it unless they take action now. Again, all of these terrorist networks are doing this in the name of Islam. So if it is not, and I'm saying it's not, I'm speaking out against it. These leaders, and I'm not a leader of a Muslim country, I'm an American Muslim. Those individuals they need to, and I hope Crown Prince Mohammed Salman takes action against all of his little neighbors. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing we have to be honest about, we're asking communities, prepare yourself, protect yourselves. But if we went after the senior leaders of these plots, where they're living in Afghanistan, where they're training these fighters in Afghanistan and dealing with it there, it wouldn't be here, right? So the fact that we're not striking in Afghanistan right now is a problem. The fact that we are acting like the terrorism fight is only in Syria, only in Somalia is a lie. It is in Afghanistan, and we need to be striking these senior leaders who are plotting against us now. That's how you thwart the plot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one other thing, in America, don't come and tell us, the Muslims here, that no, these are good ones. Don't tell us that when we come and tell you these are terrorists who are killing in the name of Islam, but they have nothing to do with us. Don't tell us this is our culture. Don't tell us the Taliban are part of us and that's our culture. Treating women like cattle as part of our culture. It's not that.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'd like to just close with is, you see what went on today with this discussion and what we did yesterday. And most of the people that are taking this discussion on are veterans or intelligence alumni who served in the global war on terror, 20-year war, right? And a lot of them, I know a lot of them. We lost a lot of friends over there, but it was less than 1% of the American population that fought that war, deployed multiple times, lots of wounded, lots of killed. And then even those of us that didn't, necessarily sustain wounds or whatever, you gave up a lot to fight that war and to do what our country asked us to do. Most of us came back from the war and made a concerted effort to put the war behind us and move on, and then it was just a few years later that we were sucked back in because our buddy who was a commando was being targeted, or as the country fell, like the people we cared about, many of us are alive because of some of these guys and girls. Like we stepped in when the government didn't. But one of the things I just want to leave with is I get a sense sometimes that like the people, the veterans that are talking about this actually even want to be doing this. I mean, there's a way that we were brought into this that I think most people, even supporters, don't understand. You know, you had Ben Owen on your show, right? And he and Jess, and they helped a young girl named Arizo get to the United States, one among many. She's the daughter of a commando who'd been a commando from the very beginning, right? And so they made a decision. Ben and Jess have expended their kids' college funds, like so many other folks, to help. But like this is what Jess heard that made her decide to do this action. And what I just want people to understand, this is what was impacting veterans from 2021 and what they've been listening to and watching for the last 4 years. After all that they did in combat, after all that we've asked of them, this is what they're inundated with even now every day. That's Arizo's mom. That's her dad is being tortured out in the alley. And put our veterans through that for 4 straight years. They did what we asked them to do. They answered the call. And you know, it's time, man. It's time that we bring the government and the veteran population together on this, and that we reconcile this and we get this into the hands of the government the way it's supposed to be, and it gets handled. But it's not right now. And this is hurting a lot of people. It is hurting a lot of veterans. They don't know how to hang up the phone. They don't know how to stop doing this, and they won't, and it's killing them. You know, it's killing them. And it's not a fair thing to put at their feet. They've done enough. We need to find a way, bring the two worlds together, and let's fix it. But right now, you're the only voice that's even putting it out there. And that's got to change.
Legendary, we want to close with a thing. What do you got?
Yes. So this, thank you. This is part of a letter written by an Afghan commando, a general. His name is Khalid Amiri. He is leading the resistance in Afghanistan right now, since 2021. I'll read part of his letter. It says, the strength of any military force relies on 6 principles: leadership, discipline, institution building, technology and weaponry, strategy, and support systems. Taliban factions and militias are not only unfamiliar with these principles, but the equipment and weapon left behind by Afghan armed forces are inadequate to meet the group's long-term needs. At best, the Taliban remain an insurgent group lacking the capacity for institution building and governance. The armed struggle of Afghanistan's freedom fighters over the past 3 years and the significant casualties they have inflicted on Taliban militias demonstrate the group's vulnerability in military and intelligence terms. A powerful and united anti-Taliban front could bring the Taliban to their knees. Taliban leaders and militias are unfamiliar with the diverse languages and cultures of Afghan society and will never gain national or popular legitimacy. The people of Afghanistan, both in cities and rural areas, view them as occupiers. The populace is fed up with the repressive, anti-women and anti-freedom rule of the Taliban, and it will not be long before our people's uprising will drive them out of our land. This is written by General Khalid Amiri, and he is, as I said, leading the resistance against the Taliban. This is not, he's in the fight. Mm-hmm. He tells you that the Taliban are very much defeatable. President Saleh says the Taliban are very much defeatable. I hope somebody in the administration and the new administration listens to this letter that I just read and takes action. Mm-hmm. This is something that we can't solve. It will be a tragedy, a very sad tragedy, if the guys that we trained in Afghanistan to fight terrorists, we end up fighting those guys here in America.
Mm-hmm. Well, Legend, Sarah, Scott, I really appreciate you guys coming. And what I appreciate more is what happened yesterday, where you guys briefed up my community, and I just want to say thank you for that. And in closing, for everybody that's planning at home, you know, community leaders, sheriffs, chief of police, anybody, you know, I remember Eric Prince said this on my show: professionals think about logistics, amateurs think about tactics. You have to think about logistics first. So, with that being said, thank you again for coming, and see you soon. No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.